Welcome to Mr. Shadow Speak. Tonight, we're exploring terrifying, real-life encounters that ordinary people have shared, true stories that defy logic and haunt the imagination. From eerie cabins in the woods to shadowy figures lurking in hallways, these experiences remind us that sometimes reality is scarier than any fiction. So, turn off the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for 6 spine-tingling tales that will make you think twice about the places you go and the shadows you see. Are you ready? Let's begin with the first bone-chilling story. Our first story is about a group of friends who thought a secluded cabin in the woods would be the perfect getaway, but they soon realized they weren't alone. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway, but it became something out of a nightmare. A group of friends, Sarah, Mike, Lily, and Tom, rented a small cabin deep in the woods. The nearest town was miles away. They wanted a break from their busy lives to disconnect from the world, enjoy nature, and spend a peaceful weekend by a campfire. The first day was fun. They set up a campfire, shared stories, and took photos. As the night settled in, they went inside to sleep, but that's when the strange occurrences began. It started with small noises, the sound of twigs snapping, footsteps outside, and soft whispers that seemed to drift in through the window. At first, they brushed it off, thinking it was just animals or the wind. But as the night went on, the noises grew louder, more persistent. It felt wrong, as if someone was circling their cabin, watching them. Sarah, who couldn't sleep, felt an intense feeling of dread. She walked to the window and glanced outside, and that's when she saw it. Just beyond the trees, partially hidden in the darkness, a figure stood motionless, staring back at her with hollow, empty eyes. Her heart raced. She backed away, wondering if her mind was playing tricks on her, but the figure stayed unmoving, as if it was waiting for something. She didn't wake her friends, hoping it would disappear, that it was just her imagination. Around midnight, everyone was jolted awake by a sudden, loud banging on the door. It sounded urgent, desperate. They froze, paralyzed by fear. Who could be out here, miles from civilization? None of them dared to open the door. They huddled together, hoping the banging would stop. Then, as if taunting them, the door handle started to turn, slowly, creaking as if someone was trying to get in. But just as quickly as it had started, everything went silent. The friends sat in silence, too terrified to move. The next morning, they opened the door and found scratch marks all over the cabin door and windows. Deep, jagged lines, as if something with claws had tried to break in. They left the cabin without looking back, haunted by the memory of the figure in the woods. Our next story takes us to an old apartment building where one college student discovers he may have an unwanted visitor lurking outside his door. Jake was a college student who had just moved into an old apartment building on the outskirts of the city. The place was cheap and the rent was low, which was perfect for him as a broke college student. But the building had a reputation. Rumors of strange occurrences, odd sounds, and mysterious happenings ran through the local community. Some people claimed it was haunted, while others said it was just an old building settling, creaking, and groaning with age. But Jake wasn't the superstitious type. He just needed a place to stay. The apartment seemed normal at first. Jake moved in, unpacked his things, and got settled. It was a small one-bedroom with outdated furniture, but it had a certain charm to it. At night, however, things would start to feel different. Every night, as Jake tried to fall asleep, he would hear strange noises. At first, it was just the usual sounds you expect from an old building: the sound of pipes groaning, the creak of wooden floors, and the wind rattling the windows. But over time, something else started. Every night, without fail, Jake would hear the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway outside his apartment door. Slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps that seemed to walk directly past his door and then fade away into the distance. The first time it happened, Jake thought it was just the neighbors. Maybe someone was walking down the hallway late at night, but the footsteps grew more distinct and eerie as the nights passed. They always came at the same time, around 3 a.m., and always stopped right outside his door. One night, Jake couldn't stand it anymore. He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever it was. The hallway was eerily quiet, but then he heard something, a soft shuffle. He turned towards the noise and saw something that made his blood run cold. In the far corner of the hallway stood a figure. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and dressed in what looked like old, tattered clothes. Its face was obscured by a shadow, but Jake could feel its eyes boring into him. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Jake's heart raced. He took a step back, but the figure didn't follow. It didn't move at all. He blinked, and when he looked again, the figure was gone. There was nothing in the hallway, just the dim lights flickering overhead. Jake didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he went to the building's landlord and asked about the strange occurrences. The landlord just looked at him, then nodded. "You're not the first to see him," he said, his voice low. "It's been happening for years. People see him sometimes. No one knows who or what he is, but he's always here, watching." Jake left the building that day, never returning. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following him. In our third story, a young woman finds herself haunted by a ghostly apparition that appears in the bathroom mirror of her grandmother's house. But it's not the first time this spirit has been seen. Lily had always found her grandmother's house to be unsettling. It wasn't that it was a bad place, but it always had a cold, heavy feeling, especially at night. Her grandmother's house was old, passed down through generations, and had a lot of history. But it wasn't just the age of the house that made Lily uneasy. It was the sense of something lurking in the corners, in the shadows. It was most noticeable in the bathroom. The bathroom was small, with a large old mirror that always seemed a bit too big for the room. At night, the reflections seemed to move oddly, like they were out of sync with the real world. Lily would try to avoid it whenever she could, but there was one night she couldn't. It started as an ordinary evening. Lily was getting ready for bed, brushing her teeth in the bathroom, when she noticed something odd in the mirror. It was faint at first, a small movement behind her, just at the edge of her vision. She turned around, but the room was empty. Shrugging it off, she continued brushing her teeth, but then she saw it again. This time, she clearly saw the reflection of a little girl standing behind her. The girl was wearing an old-fashioned dress with dark, matted hair that covered her face. She stood still, staring at Lily with hollow, lifeless eyes. Lily spun around, expecting to see someone standing behind her, but the bathroom was empty. She froze, staring at the mirror, but the girl was gone. It was as if she had never been there. Her heart began to race, and she immediately left the bathroom to find her grandmother. Her grandmother When told of the strange sight, just looked at her with an odd expression. "Ah, you saw her too," she said. "I've seen her, your mother's seen her, and even your aunt. It's been happening for years." Lily learned that the little girl was believed to be the spirit of a young girl who had drowned in the family's well many years ago. Ever since, her spirit had wandered the house, often appearing in the mirror, staring at whoever was in the room. Lily never looked in that bathroom mirror again. Story 4 is a account of a late night driver picks up an unexpected and very unwanted passenger on a deserted rural. Rick was a night owl. He loved late night drives, especially when the roads were emptied and the world was quiet. One night he was driving home after a long shift at work, taking a shortcut along an old rural road. He had heard the rumors about this road. People said it was haunted, that strange things happened there at night. But Eric didn't believe in such things. He was just focused on getting home. As he drove along the deserted road, something strange happened. Out of the corner of his eye, Eric saw movement in the back seat of his car. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but when he glanced in the rearview mirror, he froze. There, sitting in the back seat, was a woman. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, and she wore a tattered old dress that looked like it had been through years of wear. Her hair was long and unkempt, hanging over her face, but the most unsettling part was her eyes. They were wide, lifeless, staring directly at him, as though she was waiting for something. Eric slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding in his chest. But when he looked back, the woman was gone. The back seat was empty, as if nothing had ever been there. Shaken, Eric tried to brush it off as his mind playing tricks on him. He continued driving, but the sense of unease never left. When he got home, he told his friends about the strange encounter, and they told him the story of the woman. Years ago, a woman had been hitchhiking along that same road. She was picked up by a driver, but they both disappeared that night. Some say her spirit still haunts that road, waiting for someone to pick her up. She's been spotted by many people, always in the back seat, staring at them with empty, lifeless eyes. Eric never drove that road again, and to this day, he can't shake the memory of the woman in the back seat. Our fifth story follows a young woman who, while studying alone at night, hears a knock on her window. What she sees outside is something she never forget. Emma was used to studying late into the night. She didn't mind the quiet. The house was empty. Her parents had gone to bed, and the only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing by outside. One night, she was in her room studying for an upcoming exam when she heard a knock. It wasn't from the door, though. It came from the window. At first, she thought it was just the wind or perhaps an animal outside, but the knock came again, louder this time, almost as if it was trying to get her attention. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, wondering if she should get up to investigate. She stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, it was dark, with only the faint street light casting an eerie glow across the yard. She opened the window slightly, expecting to see nothing. But there was something there. A figure stood at the base of the window, staring up at her with empty, hollow eyes. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching her, waiting. Emma quickly closed the window and backed away. She felt a chill run down her spine. The knocking had stopped, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The next morning, she went to inspect the window, only to find deep scratch marks along the glass, as if something had been trying to claw its way in. Emma never studied alone in that room again. And finally, our last story tonight takes us deep into the woods, where a group of friends encounters a figure that defies explanation and their courage is put to the test. A group of friends, Laura, Mark, Susan, and Jason, decided to spend the weekend camping in the woods. They were experienced campers, and the idea of roughing it out in the middle of nowhere sounded exciting. They arrived late in the afternoon, set up their tents, and built a fire. Everything seemed normal, and they joked around, roasting marshmallows and telling stories around the fire. But as night fell, the atmosphere changed. The forest grew silent, unnervingly so. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of the trees and the crackling of the fire. The group settled into their tents for the night, but something didn't feel right. Around midnight, Laura woke up to the sound of movement outside the tent. At first, she thought it was just one of the others getting up to go to the bathroom, but then she heard something that sent chills down her spine. A slow, deliberate shuffle. She peered out of the tent, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing just beyond the campfire's light, was a figure. It was tall, dark, and still. It was hard to make out details, but there was something wrong about it. It wasn't moving like a normal person. It was stiff, unnatural, almost inhuman. Laura quickly woke the others, but when they looked out, the figure was gone. They rushed to pack up their things and leave, but as they walked back to the car, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. None of them returned to those woods again. These were 6 bone-chilling real-life encounters shared by people like you. Have you ever experienced something similar? Tell us in the comments.